Estados Unidos de costa a costa em velocidade supersônica no ano de 1957. Desde esse voo, Kennedy sonhava em construir um supersônico de transporte civil. Outros tiveram o mesmo sonho.
The British began their supersonic aircraft program in 1943, midway through the war. It was a design, obviously, at that stage, which called for an aircraft to be capable of Mach 1.5. That's 1.5 times the speed of sound, or about 1,000 miles an hour, which is really quite adventurous when you think about the speeds they were achieving in those days.
Os britânicos fizeram diversos projetos, dentre eles o Miles M52 e o de Havilland Swallow DH-108, mas a Grã-Bretanha perdeu o primeiro lugar para Chuck Yeager, pilotando o Bell X-1 americano.
To tell you the truth, I was hopping mad, because I realized we could have done it and we'd missed the boat by a cancellation. Not with the DH-108, but with the Miles M52. I was to be the pilot of the Miles M52, so I'd followed this carefully, and we were 80% ready for the first flight, when, without any warning, without any consultation, the aircraft was cancelled.
Em 14 de outubro de 1947, o Bell X-1 com motor de foguete tornou-se o primeiro avião a ultrapassar a velocidade do som.
The British were really upset that the Americans had been first through the sound barrier, because British technology was ahead of the Americans. The British just fluffed it, lacked the guts to do it.
O motivo alegado para o cancelamento do Miles M52 foi falta de conhecimento sobre o que acontece com um avião à medida em que ele se aproxima da barreira do som.
When an aircraft approaches the speed of sound, several things happen. The most disturbing of which for the occupants of the aircraft is the aircraft begins to shake and rumble, depending on how rapidly or how slowly you approach the speed of sound. But in aerodynamic terms, a wave builds up, an area of compressibility builds up, a shock wave. And what that does is that causes increased drag and increased heating on the aircraft, such that as you approach the speed of sound, as the shock wave passes over the flying surfaces, what that does, it causes the wings to lose lift both above and below the wing. And that has a downward effect on the aircraft. So the aircraft will start to dive if you don't do anything else about it.
Modo de contrabalançar isso era usar superfícies com controle de comando, particularmente os estabilizadores na cauda. Em voos subsônicos, o ar circula sobre as asas normalmente, criando sustentação. Mas em velocidades supersônicas, uma onda de choque se forma criando resistência do ar. À velocidade do som, a onda de choque aloja-se na asa, criando pressão para baixo. Superfícies com controle de comando contrabalançam isso, forçando o nariz da aeronave para cima.
You will first start to notice the problem of approaching the transonic area. Approaching the speed of sound from about 0.9, so 9/10 of the speed of sound at sea level. And there you'll begin to experience a buffet as the shockwave begins to build up. And as you approach the speed of sound, the closer you get to the speed of sound, the greater that buffet will be, until that moment when you pop through the other side and that shockwave is then travelling behind the aircraft. You then punch through into an area of far more stable air, an area of almost quietness, if you like.
Em meados da década de 50, já era prática os aviões militares ultrapassarem a barreira do som. Mas eles voavam em intervalos curtos. Voos supersônicos prolongados eram mais complicados que simplesmente ultrapassar a barreira do som.
Supersonic flight for passengers is actually very different from supersonic flight in the military context. If you're going to fly passengers at supersonic speed, you have to fly them for a long, long time at high speed, whereas military operations tend to be a quick dash.
Apenas um país decidiu encarar o desafio. Derrotados na corrida para quebrar a barreira do som, os ingleses lançaram-se ao projeto e desenvolvimento de um supersônico de transporte civil. Era o início de uma corrida que iria transformar o mundo da aviação. Em 10 de março de 1956, os ingleses voltaram ao páreo da corrida supersônica com uma vingança, quando o avião experimental Fairey Delta II bateu o recorde mundial de velocidade a 1.820 km por hora. O Fairey Delta II tinha características revolucionárias. Asa comprida em delta, perfeita para voar acima da velocidade do som. E nariz inclinado, dando ao piloto melhor visibilidade na decolagem e no pouso. Inspirados pelo sucesso do Fairey Delta, os ingleses formaram um comitê para coordenar o projeto de um supersônico civil.
The most interesting aspect of the Fairey Delta II that we see on today's Concorde was the drooping nose. Now what that is it's simply, as you see in Concorde, a nose that kinks. One of the problems with the Delta-winged aircraft, and an aircraft that is designed for going supersonic speeds, is that in order to fly very fast, obviously you need something that is as aerodynamic as possible. The problem is they are very, very difficult to fly at low speeds. So when they come into land, they have a very high angle of attack, and very, very difficult then for the pilots to see what they're doing. So they then put this kink in the nose, if you like, to have this cantilevered nose, such that in takeoff and landing, to give the pilots better visibility, they put this design feature in, which we see today.
Em março de 1959, o projeto preliminar chegou a um ponto que permitiu ao Comitê de Transporte Civil Supersônico anunciar suas recomendações gerais.
There were two main recommendations. The first was for a small, fairly simple aircraft to carry around 100 passengers and do about Mach 1.2. The second design was for a 150-seater that should have been capable of Mach 1.8, which was considerably bigger and considerably faster.
By 1959, the British thinking had crystallized into two projects. A medium-range supersonic airliner which had a rather crazy M-shaped wing, very difficult to build. And the other project was the classic, what's now the classic long, thin delta for a supersonic airliner that could fly across the Atlantic.
A decisão tomada iria moldar o futuro da corrida para a produção de um supersônico de transporte civil.
When they awarded the design study contract in 1960, the British made it a condition to BAC, who got the contract, that they should seek international collaboration for the building of the supersonic transporter.
O primeiro país que a British Aircraft Corporation procurou foram os Estados Unidos. Mas em 1960, os americanos demonstraram pouco interesse em uma colaboração. Então, os ingleses recorreram à França como um aliado em potencial.
The British and French eventually decided to cooperate because the supersonic airliner project was just too big for either of them to do on their own. It was helped by the fact that the two different design teams in France and in England had more or less come to the same conclusion about what the aircraft should look like.
O design do avião deveria incluir a asa em delta. Teria o nome de Concorde, uma palavra comum às duas línguas que significa concordância ou harmonia. Mas para ter credibilidade, o Concorde precisava de passageiros nos aviões. Em junho de 1963, recebeu uma importante encomenda, significando que o projeto iria decolar. E a encomenda não veio da Europa, mas da principal empresa aérea americana, a Pan Am.
Well, Pan Am was such a good customer that they could go in and play one aircraft factory leader against another. And Tripp didn't mind going in threatening and saying, look, if you don't do this, I'm going to get somebody else to do it. And if I have to go to Europe, I'm going to Europe. Tripp was an overpowering figure in the industry at that time.
A Pan Am iniciou suas operações em 28 de outubro de 1927 com o primeiro voo programado internacional de uma empresa aérea americana. Um avião trimotor Fokker, carregado de correspondência, decolou de Key West, Flórida, e pousou 1 hora e 10 minutos depois em Havana, Cuba, percorrendo uma distância de 135 quilômetros. Aos 28 anos de idade, seu fundador foi o legendário Juan Terry Tripp. Ele percebeu que aviões de carga podiam facilmente transportar passageiros. Colocando assentos na traseira dos aviões, ele cobrava $100 para voar para a Havana. Tripp estava determinado a fazer com que a Pan Am fosse sempre líder no mercado americano.
In the post-war world, in the 1960s, Pan American Airlines was one of the big names. Most American airlines tended to fly inside America, but Pan Am had built its reputation on flying all around the world. And they did that by always buying the latest and best aircraft.
Em 26 de outubro de 1958, a Pan Am tornou-se a primeira linha aérea americana a voar com um avião a jato civil, um Boeing 707, batizado de Clipper America. Voava de Nova York a Paris e seu tempo de voo era metade do normal. Juan Tripp determinou que a Pan Am seria a primeira empresa aérea civil a ter aviões supersônicos.
If you joined Pan Am as a pilot in the late 1950s or 1960s, the first thing they told you was, you hang in there, guys, because you are going to fly supersonic. Pan Am saw that being the first to be with the supersonic airliner as you know, the thing that would brand the company as the place to go.
Mas a decisão da Pan Am iria desencadear uma reação no país. Após alguns dias do anúncio, em 5 de junho de 1963, o presidente John Kennedy anunciou a intenção do governo de dar apoio à indústria aeronáutica para o desenvolvimento e construção de um avião supersônico civil que pudesse ser operado pelas empresas aéreas americanas como a Pan Am.
When Kennedy heard that Pan American were going to buy the European Concorde, he was apoplectic. He was furious. And he phones up head of Pan Am, Juan Tripp, and just gives him a bawling out. And Tripp says, well, you know, the alternative is you give me an American supersonic airliner. So from that moment on, Kennedy decides he is going to get a hold of the American aircraft companies and he's going to make them build a supersonic airliner faster and higher in performance than the European rival.
E foi assim que a corrida começou.
The immediate result of Kennedy's intervention in the race to build a supersonic transporter was the appropriation of $100 million worth of funding from Congress, which in 1963 was a serious amount of money.
O Concorde agora tinha um concorrente americano. A questão era quem iria construí-lo. Um candidato óbvio era a Douglas, a maior fabricante de aviões civis do país, que produzia desde o lendário DC-3 até o jato DC-8. Mas a empresa estava muito desfalcada para competir. Outros candidatos eram a North American, que já estava desenvolvendo um bombardeiro supersônico, o B-70 Valkyrie, e a Lockheed, que tinha grande experiência em aviões supersônicos, como o SR-71 Blackbird. Também havia a Boeing, a fabricante do temido bombardeiro B-52 e da linha 707 de aviões de passageiro.
Of all the American aircraft companies, paradoxically, Boeing was the one that had the most trouble in getting into the supersonic airline business. Boeing hadn't actually delivered a supersonic aircraft to anybody.
Atualmente, a Boeing é a maior empresa aeroespacial do mundo. Emprega cerca de 200 mil funcionários e possui clientes em 145 países. Sua renda anual é de aproximadamente $60 bilhões. Mas a Boeing teve um início modesto. Seu fundador, William Boeing, era filho de um rico madeireiro. Em 1903, Boeing saiu da Universidade de Yale e foi para o estado de Washington para fazer fortuna na indústria da madeira. Em 1910, William Boeing foi para Los Angeles e participou da primeira competição aérea americana. Tentou pegar uma carona em um dos aviões, mas nenhum dos 12 pilotos participantes o acolheu. Boeing voltou para Seattle, determinado a construir e pilotar seus próprios aviões.
Bill Boeing was, some people think he was an inventor, but Bill Boeing was an innovator of the highest order. I think he has very few patents, perhaps if any, but he would look at a product and he could see where he could make it better.
Em 15 de julho de 1916, Boeing fundou sua fábrica de aviões em Seattle, em um antigo estaleiro. Contratou construtores de barco cuja habilidade em carpintaria era perfeita para a nova indústria de aviões. No início, a Boeing prosperou fabricando hidroplanos para a Marinha Americana e depois aviões de combate para a aeronáutica. Mas foi a Segunda Guerra Mundial que levou a Boeing ao auge do sucesso.
The war was starting in Europe, and Wright Field put out an order for bids for, at this time, most of the airplanes were two-engine. We were still two-engine. Douglas was doing a two-engine bomber, and another company was doing a two-engine bomber. And Boeing went in to Wright Field and said, would this procurement cover a four-engine bomber? And everybody just went berserk because nobody ever conceived of a four-engine bomber.
Era o XB-15, um avião quadrimotor com envergadura de asa de 45 metros.
It was so big, you could tunnel out through the wing, and you could come into the nacelle, and you could make repairs in flight.
Uma versão menor deste gigante viria a ficar famosa. A fortaleza voadora B-17, que dominou os ares durante a Segunda Guerra Mundial.
I think they ordered 13 or 14 what they call test airplanes, and that led to the Flying Fortress. I don't remember exactly how many were built, but it was around 13,000. And that airplane then went through the A series, B series, C series, all the way to H, as I recall. I'd say the story of the B-17 was it was such a versatile airplane, was able to keep carrying more bombs, more turrets.
Enquanto os americanos iam para a guerra, as americanas produziam aviões. Milhares de mulheres compensaram a falta de mão de obra e ajudaram a aumentar a produção na Boeing de 60 aviões por mês em 1942 para o surpreendente número de 362 aviões por mês em março de 1944. O B-17 foi seguido em 1942 pela superfortaleza B-29. Em Wichita, trabalhadores rurais, donas de casa e comerciantes produziam aviões B-29 em turnos de 10 horas, dia e noite, durante a que mais tarde ficou conhecida como Batalha do Kansas.
World War II transformed the fortunes of the Boeing company. Before that, it was a serious manufacturer, but planes were built in small numbers. World War II meant Boeing was producing vast numbers of giant bombers on huge assembly line.
Após a Segunda Guerra Mundial veio o B-47, o primeiro bombardeiro a jato americano. E em 15 de abril de 1952, o piloto de testes da Boeing, Tex Johnston, fez o primeiro voo com um B-52 que iria dominar os ares nos próximos 50 anos. Então, a Boeing fez uma aposta.
In the 1950s, Boeing was doing quite well in military contracts for the B-47 and the B-52 bombers. But no aircraft company, can afford not to look ahead because it takes a long while to develop aircraft. And so they took a bold decision. They decided, well, let's take some of the profits from the bombers, some of that technology, and see if we could mix that into an aircraft that passengers would want to use, that the airlines would want to buy.
We had all the knowledge of the B-47 and the B-52, so it wasn't too big a job in the wind tunnel to develop a low-wing airplane that could be used as a tanker, and we knew they needed a tanker, so there had to be a tanker, and we hoped it could be a passenger airplane, although we weren't really sure that that was the case. So that's why the Dash 80 was born.
O Dash 80 subiu aos ares sob o comando de Tex Johnston, que havia pilotado o B-52. Johnston estava determinado a mostrar que a Boeing havia produzido um ótimo avião. Então fez um parafuso sobre a pista do hidroplano Seafair, no Lago Washington, em 7 de agosto de 1955. Manobra que apenas aviões de caça ágeis conseguem executar. O presidente da Boeing, William Allen, foi testemunha ocular.
And Allen turned completely white, looked over at his technical advisor, Wellwood Beale, and he said, "Did we authorize that?" And then just before you could turn around, here he came back again and did it once more.
A aposta da Boeing compensou. O DC-80 virou o protótipo para o KC-135, o primeiro avião-tanque a jato. E ele se transformou no modelo 707, o primeiro de uma longa linha de aviões comerciais a jato da Boeing. A Boeing tivera uma ideia brilhante com o 707. Usando 1/10 de combustível, o avião de $5 milhões podia transportar tantos passageiros em viagens transatlânticas por ano, quanto o navio Queen Mary, de $30 milhões. A Boeing havia criado um mercado e aniquilou o transatlântico. Em 1958, com o 707 entrando em operação pela Panam, a Boeing montou um pequeno grupo para se concentrar no projeto de um supersônico de transporte civil. Em 1960, a empresa estava gastando mais de $1 milhão por ano no projeto. O projeto foi chamado de Modelo 733.
Boeing actually started work on supersonic passenger airliners very early on, right at the beginning of the 1950s. But in a kind of research way, is this possible? Where are the engines going? Where is the metallurgy going? But what you begin to see is by the end of the 1950s, they're starting to get quite serious about it. They're beginning to think this can be done.
Com o apelo de Kennedy para que se produzisse um supersônico civil, o modelo 733 poderia finalmente tornar-se realidade. Durante todo o final de 1963, os 3 participantes da concorrência para a fabricação do supersônico civil, Boeing, Lockheed e North American, desenvolveram em sigilo seus projetos. Quem iria ganhar e com que tipo de avião? E mais importante, os fabricantes americanos ainda conseguiriam conquistar o mercado? No final de 1963, o metal para o primeiro Concorde já estava sendo cortado. Os Estados Unidos conseguiriam alcançá-lo? Anos antes houve um precedente. A Comet britânica havia sido a primeira empresa aérea a operar com jatos na década de 50. Mas uma série de acidentes fatais revelaram graves falhas de projeto, resultantes da pressa de entrar em operação e sair na frente dos americanos. Como resultado, o Boeing 707 subitamente passou a dominar os ares nas décadas de 50 e 60.
The Americans came late to the supersonic race. They wanted to leapfrog the Europeans, and so they decided to go faster. The Europeans were going for Mach 2.2, which meant they could build Concorde out of existing materials using existing technology. The Americans decided to go way up to Mach 3 through the so-called heat barrier, which meant that because of the stresses on the plane at those speeds and the heat that would build up on the fuselage, they had to use new materials. So the Americans were going for a technological breakthrough to try and get ahead of the Europeans and bury the competition.
Para derrotar a concorrência, tanto em casa quanto na Europa, a Boeing propôs um avião que fosse bem maior que o Concorde. Ele foi chamado de 2707.
Boeing realized that if they were going to beat the Anglo-French Concorde, they would have to be bigger, better and faster. So their design was for a faster aircraft and for one that would carry 2.5 times the number of passengers as Concorde. So instead of 120, we're looking at 277 passengers on board.
Para ajudar a projetar o novo 2707, a Boeing construiu uma maquete em tamanho natural. O avião tinha 93 metros de comprimento, 1/3 maior que o Concorde. Havia 277 assentos, 30 de primeira classe e 247 de classe turística, 2,5 vezes o número de passageiros que o Concorde podia transportar. A distribuição dos assentos no 2707 era revolucionária. Até então, cada fileira tinha 2 assentos apertados de cada lado de um único corredor, que fazia os aviões parecerem claustrofóbicos.
Boeing decided that in order to entice people into this new aircraft with these fancy speeds, they'd have to offer a bit of something else. And so they made the fuselage bigger so they could get more seating in. Today we are very used to three sets of seats, 2 aisles, but this was the first time when Boeing was developing the supersonic airliner that they decided to introduce that into an aircraft.
Em comparação, o Concorde possuía fuselagem bastante estreita e os tradicionais 2 conjuntos de assentos com um único corredor. O 2707 seria equipado com 4 robustos turbojatos, cada um com potência de aproximadamente 30 toneladas. Na decolagem, seu peso total seria de mais de 300 toneladas.
The Boeing 2707 had 2 other very interesting features. The first was a drooping nose, not unlike we see on Concorde today, to allow the pilots much better visibility in takeoff and landing, and then to be flicked up for that needle-like high-speed flight. The second design feature was also to do with the differences between low speeds for approach and landing and high speeds in supersonic, and that was the swing wing. The wing was able to pivot for those slow speed areas, making it easier and safer to fly when taking off and landing. But then when it was up above the Atlantic or Pacific or wherever it was going to go and approaching its speeds of Mach 2, you could sweep the wings back and get a very similar effect to the Delta.
As asas da maquete do Boeing 2707 podiam ser movidas manualmente, indo de totalmente dobradas em um ângulo de 72 graus a totalmente estendidas em um ângulo de 30 graus.
The Boeing supersonic airliner was really pushing the boundaries of aviation technology. They were going to go faster, for longer, which meant new materials, new kinds of engines, new kind of avionics. It was a risk.
Uma das empresas que o considerou um risco foi a Lockheed, que também tinha um projeto de supersônico de transporte civil, o L-2000.
The Lockheed design for a supersonic airliner was simple, elegant, beautiful. No complex moving parts like a swing wing. They'd adopted the narrow delta that everyone knew was going to work. It was within the boundaries of what was possible. They were minimizing the risks, and that's why it was a serious competitor.
Enquanto o prazo ia se esgotando para a entrega dos projetos, a Boeing continuava tentando superar a concorrência.
As the design process went on, it became obvious that the Boeing entry was going to be terribly complex, terribly expensive. That made the airlines who were going to have to buy and use the thing frightened. So Boeing started adding on more and more passengers in the hope that it could make a profit that would make up for the escalating costs of the aircraft in the first place.
Size does help you a little bit on efficiency, at least it has on the other airplanes, and so obviously you can go overboard and be too fast, but too big. But I think that we felt the Concorde was too small to be a successful system.
Era o último dia de 1966 quando o vencedor da concorrência foi anunciado. Era o projeto revolucionário da Boeing.
I think it was a very tough competition. The reason we won the configuration was not necessarily that the airlines liked our configuration any better. My personal opinion is that I think that they felt that they would rather have Boeing build their commercial airplane than the other 2 manufacturers, because we were in the process of building commercial airplanes at that time and working with the airlines, and my personal opinion is that we were picked as a company, not as a design.
It was a surprise that Boeing won because they had so little experience in building working supersonic aircraft. I mean, they were famous for the B-52 bomber, which is subsonic. Everyone else, I mean, Convair, Lockheed had built large and fairly successful supersonic aircraft. So this was the new guy on the block suddenly being given the job, and everyone thought, can they do it?
A Boeing previu que se o projeto e a construção dos protótipos começassem no início de 1967, o primeiro voo poderia se realizar no início de 1970, e que o primeiro avião estaria pronto para entrar em serviço em meados de 1974. Mas a previsão estava errada. Eles não tinham ideia dos problemas que iriam enfrentar.
The main problem in designing the Boeing supersonic airliner can be summed up in one word: the weight. This thing just got fat. It got heavier and heavier. It wasn't going to make money. They had to then strip out weight, and in the end, the biggest weight penalty was going to be the mechanism to make the wings swing.
As we got beyond the preliminary design stage to build it, the weight got too heavy. The empty weight got too heavy. That was the main problem. The weight just got out of hand, and we couldn't meet the weight statement that we'd estimated for the configuration at the start.
O projeto ficou parado durante um ano, enquanto a Boeing considerava alternativas. Em outubro de 1968, foi feito praticamente um novo projeto.
There was only one way to solve the weight penalty problem. That was to take the swing wing out.
Boeing's swing wing disappeared mostly because of the extra weight. That huge hinge in there was very, very heavy.
O 2707 também foi reduzido em tamanho. Os assentos foram reduzidos para 234 passageiros, embora continuasse maior que o Concorde. Então surgiu um novo problema para assombrar o projeto e, por fim, cancelá-lo: o estrondo supersônico.
We knew it existed, but frankly, I didn't think it was that bad. The sonic boom that the airplanes we were talking about was like thunder and lightning, where the thunder hits about 2 miles away. And I guess I just didn't figure it was that bad.
In order to explore the effects of the sonic boom on, for example, urban areas, the American Air Force conducted an experiment in 1964, which is something I don't think we would ever contemplate doing today. And what they wanted to do was see what effect it had on an urban area. So they they flew supersonic bombers over Oklahoma City with sonic booms or waves of shocked air passing all the time. The result was that in a very short period of time they had around 8,000 very vocal complaints and around 5,000 complaints for claims for damages.
Em 1967, logo após a Boeing ter ganhado a concorrência para fabricar o 2707, o Dr. William Sutcliffe, um cientista da Universidade de Harvard, fundou a Liga dos Cidadãos contra o estrondo supersônico.
Well, actually there were so many technical and economic hurdles that had to be addressed for an airplane like this, not the least of which was the sound. Breaching the sound barrier always created a shock wave over populated areas.
Well, that era was a miserable era for me, because here I was, an engineer trying to do things, and you had these idiots back there it was a political situation, and he just jumped on it. This guy Sutcliffe, I never met him. I don't know what his problem was. I know the British were taken by surprise on it. They were completely amazed at the problems we were getting.
Outros cientistas levantaram a hipótese de que a descarga de gases do supersônico na atmosfera em grandes altitudes desencadearia uma reação química que causaria a destruição da camada de ozônio na estratosfera, resultando em um aumento do câncer de pele.
I think there were other environmental concerns, perhaps not substantiated technically, about the ozone layer, about contamination of the upper atmosphere. There were all sorts of boogeymen shoved into the front of the table having to do with so-called environmental problems.
A opinião pública começou a se voltar contra o supersônico civil. E, à medida que a resistência aumentava, o próprio Congresso começou a ter dúvidas quanto ao avião. Em resposta, o presidente Richard Nixon, logo após ter sido eleito em 1968, nomeou um comitê de 12 pessoas que fariam um inquérito sobre o projeto.
Nixon was a firm believer in the SST when he came to power, like Presidents Johnson and Kennedy before him, and he felt that the SST was essential to American prestige. And in order to underline the case for the SST, he appointed a committee. To his great surprise, I think, and consternation, the committee came out against the SST and decided it was completely unviable.
À parte o estrondo supersônico, o supersônico civil da Boeing enfrentava outros problemas. Em seu apelo à nação, o presidente Kennedy decretou que ele voaria mais rápido que seu concorrente europeu. Chegaria a Mach 3. Mas a essa velocidade, o revestimento da fuselagem superaquece. É preciso que ele seja feito de materiais caríssimos para não derreter ou rachar em altas temperaturas.
To reach the speed that the 2707 was going to go at, you had to find new materials to deal with the build-up of heat. The most effective material would be titanium. And at that time, titanium was really, really complex to machine, very expensive to get a hold of. It was going to make the whole project uncommercial.
It's tough environment, and temperatures in Maine is a real big problem. Whether you can ever design a structure to meet all this and still have enough left over to make any money with is not too clear at this point.
Os ingleses já haviam concluído que esses problemas eram difíceis e caros demais para serem solucionados. O Concorde voaria a menos de 2.000 km por hora, velocidade em que os problemas de aquecimento eram reduzidos. Portanto, poderia ser construído com ligas metálicas comuns, o que reduziria os custos de fabricação.
You went much faster than Mach 2. We got too hot for aluminum. I don't know aluminum. I can't tell you exactly, but you wouldn't want to go too much beyond 2 to get to with aluminum. So you needed a better material, and titanium was quite capable. It was a good material, and we felt that it would be. So part of the program was learning how to manufacture.
Enquanto os engenheiros da Boeing lutavam para solucionar os problemas, o projeto do 2707 sofria atrasos atrás de atrasos, e os custos ficavam estratosféricos.
We spent several $1 million of our own company money in working titanium on the side of the outside of the contract on the SST, but maybe we were too ambitious. It might have worked at 2.5 Mach number, but I think that you go 3 and that's 400 degrees, and that's too hot.
Em 18 de maio de 1971, o Senado americano reuniu-se para votar uma medida para suspender a verba do projeto. O presidente Nixon fizera de tudo para convencer os senadores a manter o projeto, mas sem sucesso. Por 58 votos contra 37, decidiu-se pelo cancelamento do Boeing 2707.
I think that Kennedy's decree that the SST should be bigger, better and faster than the European rival did cause major problems for Boeing and for the whole project right throughout it, because they were always aiming for this kind of Kennedy standard of Mach 3 and all the problems that are associated with flying at Mach 3.
I think that was too hot. It just wasn't practical. I think we could go faster than the 2. I think 2.5 would have probably been okay from a temperature standpoint. But certainly any higher than that would have probably not been practical.
A Europa assumiu ares de que ganhara a corrida tecnológica. Em 1973, 18 meses após o projeto do supersônico civil da Boeing ser cancelado, o Concorde fez sua primeira viagem aos Estados Unidos para comparecer à inauguração do novo aeroporto Dallas-Fort Worth. Durante sua estada de 4 dias no Texas, o Concorde fez voos de demonstração sobre o Golfo do México e foi a maior atração dentre os aviões que participaram das cerimônias de inauguração do aeroporto. Mas logo se concluiria que a vitória do Concorde era apenas temporária. Os problemas que se abateram sobre o Boeing 2707 e levaram ao seu cancelamento também afetaram o Concorde, sobretudo o estrondo supersônico. A British Airways fez seu primeiro voo supersônico regular entre Londres e Bahrein, no Golfo Pérsico, em 21 de janeiro de 1976. Infelizmente, a rota era na maior parte continental, obrigando o Concorde a voar em velocidade subsônica em grande parte do voo. Em seguida, a empresa introduziu um voo para Singapura. Mas em 13 de dezembro de 1977, após realizar apenas 3 viagens, o serviço foi suspenso devido a reclamações do governo da Malásia referentes ao estrondo supersônico sobre o Estreito de Malacca, na costa oeste da Malásia.
Ultimately, Concorde, though it made it into passenger service, it suffered the sonic boom problem that had dogged the early Boeing project. The Americans banned supersonic flight over the continental United States. Some people said that was in retaliation. Whether it was or wasn't is neither here nor there. It meant that Concorde could only fly supersonic over the Atlantic.
It couldn't meet any of the requirements that we couldn't meet, and it still can't, but there's so few of them that nobody cares. They don't meet the sonic boom, and they don't meet the takeoff noise, and I guess there are probably only half a dozen or so flying in each airline.
Concorde will never be profitable in the sense of making back the money that it cost to buy or to develop. As far as the airlines are concerned, well, Concorde makes money on an individual flight-by-flight basis because it can charge very high tickets to the kind of luxury passengers that are there.
The system exists now because it's unique and it's high cost and it's one of a kind, and if you want to make a splash, you go over on the Concorde. And okay, Betsy and I were on that one. We went over, take off from Washington about 4:30 we took off from Washington about 4:30 in the afternoon, and in a hotel room in London, 9 o'clock. It's great.
Mas há um aspecto da história do Boeing 2707 que nunca foi contado. Um desdobramento que deu início à era do transporte aéreo de massa. Em 22 de dezembro de 1965, o presidente da Boeing, William Allen, e Juan Trippe, da Pan Am, assinaram uma carta de intenção que comprometia a Pan Am a comprar 25 aviões de carga novos. Ao contrário do 2707, que monopolizava a atenção da Boeing, o novo avião era praticamente um adendo. Seu projeto era simples. Era apenas um aperfeiçoamento do 707. Foi chamado de modelo 747. Logo mais, seria conhecido no mundo todo por Jumbo.
The 747 is an amazing story. And it started back right after the Vietnam War, where the government said, we need to move a lot of material and a lot of people around the world in a hurry.
The 747 was actually developed in tandem with the Boeing supersonic project, and the aim was to put in the 747 what you couldn't get in the supersonic aircraft, which was freight. It was just meant to be a big cargo plane in the first place.
The Boeing company in 1965 decided to scale up the 707, I think as a freighter originally, but it was soon realized you could pack so many people into these aircraft and fly them at high subsonic speeds that it was very, very commercially viable, made great sense.
Quando o sonho do supersônico de transporte civil se desfez, só havia um avião para ocupar a brecha, o 747. O primeiro 747 entrou em serviço com a Pan Am em 1970 e deu início a uma revolução na aviação. Subitamente, o custo de uma viagem aérea de longa distância cabia no orçamento de uma família comum. A era do transporte aéreo de massa havia nascido. Atualmente existem mais de 1.200 Boeing 747 voando, enquanto que os Concordes são apenas 12.
I think the 747 will still be flying in 20 years. It's one of the major developments of this century in aerospace.
Curiously, there's one hangover from the old supersonic project that ended up in the 747, and that was seating arrangement. When they transformed the 747, the jumbo jet, into a passenger plane, because it was wide-bodied, they could put in a couple of rows, you'd get a lot more seats. And that was the original dream that the supersonic transport had been born with.
Mas o interesse da Boeing por um supersônico de transporte civil não terminou com o 2707. Na Rússia, a NASA encontrou um modelo aposentado de supersônico civil, o Tu-144, apelidado de Konkordsky.
The Russian SST actually flew just a few months before Concorde, And when people saw it, they said, gosh, that looks like Concorde, and that's because, of course, the Russians had stolen, line for line, page for page, the plans of the Concorde and built it themselves.
Mas o Concordski nunca operou em rota internacional. A tecnologia soviética não estava à altura do desafio de construir um supersônico de transporte civil, nem com a ajuda de um projeto roubado. O avião era difícil de pilotar e não apresentava segurança. Seu último voo foi como laboratório voador para tentar solucionar os problemas ambientais que se abateram sobre o velho 2707. Os engenheiros da NASA e da Boeing idealizaram um novo jato supersônico que pudesse transportar 300 passageiros a mais de 2.400 km por hora e atravessar o Pacífico de Los Angeles a Tóquio em apenas 4 horas e meia. Mas essa era precisamente a especificação do velho 2707, cancelado quase 20 anos antes.
The main thing that's happened is you've gone to high bypass ratio engines, and the engine cycles changed, and the noise problem isn't as bad as it used to be with a pure jet.
Em 20 anos, a tecnologia para produzir e pôr em operação supersônicos complexos foi aperfeiçoada. Mas alguns problemas ainda não foram solucionados. O custo para construir, colocar em operação e manter um supersônico de grande porte ainda é muito alto. E ainda haveria o problema da poluição e do barulho.
There is no technology anywhere that I'm aware of that says that you can bypass, overpass, whatever, the supersonic barrier. It's there. The boom just has to be there. There's so much energy involved when you go through that barrier.
The dream of supersonic transport was an engineer's dream, it was a politician's dream, it was Kennedy's dream. The passengers wanted something different. They wanted cheap tickets, they wanted reliable service, they wanted comfort, and that will always be the future of the airline business.
Now, as a matter of fact, if somebody were to ask me today, will there ever be a supersonic airplane in the U.S., built by the U.S., I would say first you got to define what you mean by supersonic. There may very well be a more advanced Mach 2 airplane, larger, more economical, and so forth than the Concorde. They may very well be. I don't know that. But we are still today not ready in materials to go to Mach 3. We just don't have the wherewithal to do it.
Mas o sonho continua. Ainda hoje, a Boeing continua desenvolvendo projetos para superar os limites da velocidade na aviação civil. O Lockheed SR-71 Blackbird voa rotineiramente em Mach 3. É feito de titânio, mas os avanços na metalurgia e na tecnologia de materiais não param. Será que o século XXI verá o sonho se concretizar quando aviões civis voarem ao lado do Blackbird? Este é o desafio e o maior legado do Boeing 2707. Um avião que nunca chegou a voar.